Hello, friends, it's me, KITT. When I'm not out fighting crime, I like to follow my friends at KnightRiderHistorians.com. Check it out.
Hey guys, Joe here. Um, I wanted to put a video together to tell you a little bit about something really cool that happened to me and AJ about a month ago. Um, so I'm sitting here in one of our two screen used original cars. Um, this is the same car that you saw on Jay Leno's garage back in 2018. The same car that we reunited with David Hasselhoff on Good Morning America just this past July, I believe it was. Um, but and I know a lot of you don't know the complete story behind this car, and that's something that we're working on for a future video. We're talking about putting together a documentary to kind of fill in the pieces, the missing pieces on the history of this car and whatnot. But um, to give you a little bit of background, obviously the show used 20, 25 different Firebirds and Trans Ams throughout the 4 years it was on the air. Now, this car was not used until the third season. It was used in the third and fourth season. And it was actually a kind of a general purpose throwaway stunt car. Um, so the interior of it did not have the full dash you see here when it was used on the show. It actually just had kind of a half dash where it had the fiberglass or rubber top piece, but all the stock gauges were still intact. This car was never meant to be seen up close, and that's why it was just for kind of drive-by shots. The other big difference with this car is that it did not have T-tops when it was used on the show. It was one of three different hardtop cars that they used in the show. So, um, the reason I'm telling you this, I'm going to give you a little bit of the background before I get into kind of what the cool story is. So this car was used again, third and fourth season. When the show ended, um, there was an agreement between Pontiac and Universal Studios that some of the cars were to be destroyed. Not all of them, only the cars that were given to the studio by Pontiac. It was in the contract that they needed to be destroyed. There were other cars that Universal Studios owned outright, and those are the cars that have survived, and this was one of them. So when the show ended in 1986, this car, along with many of the other ones, just kind of sat neglected on the Universal Studios backlot. And it wasn't until late 1987 that Universal Studios decided to take this specific car, and we don't know why they used this. They chose this car as opposed to the other ones that they still had. But the World Expo in Brisbane, Australia, was beginning to come together, and it was in 1988, and it was this big celebration. It was a 6 month long celebration down in Australia, and Universal Studios was scheduled to be one of the I guess you could say vendors down there, or a sponsor. So even though the show had been off the air for a year and a half, Universal Studios still wanted to have a Knight Rider presence down there. So what they did is they took this car and they took it to Pacific T-Top in Huntington Beach and had them put in aftermarket T-Tops. And they took their insert dash out of storage. Now the insert dash, for those of you who don't know, when the show was on the air and being filmed, anytime you saw KITT, his dashboard, his voice talking, the monitor, any of the gauges, flickering up and down, that was all done on a dash on a soundstage. So that's called the insert dash. And they also had an insert upper console and an insert lower console as well, as along with a couple other things. But Universal Studios took their insert dash out of storage and they rewired it so nothing would work. It was all just static, lit up to different numbers and different LEDs on, and they installed it in this car. So the dash was in, the T-tops were in, and they also did a bunch of rewiring because whenever it went down to Australia in April of 1988, there was a park employee or a technician off stage that would talk to visitors that came to see the car and pretend to be KITT. It was wired with microphones and speakers, and a lot of those, when the microphones and all the wires are still in this car. They're not functional, but they're still in this car. But so this car sat at Brisbane, Australia, for 6 months, from April to October of 1988. Tens of thousands of people came and sat in this car. Um, and they got the chance to see and talk to KITT. So when the expo ended, this car was shipped back to Universal Studios, Universal Studios Hollywood, and it ended up going into rotation at their theme park along with another car that they had already established there at the theme park. So for the next 7 years or so, 6, 7 years, these two cars were kind of swapped back and forth at the theme park. So when it came back to Universal Hollywood, it had another tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people sit in it. And then after that, in the mid 90s, they were done with this car. So they kind of parked it behind one of their maintenance buildings and just kind of forgot about it. And it sat there for 13 years. And in that 13 years, as you can imagine, things bumped into it. It got dense. The paint was peeling. People would take souvenirs off the car. And one of the souvenirs that was taken from the car at some point was the dashboard, the steering wheel, everything. So when AJ and I got the car in 2008, it was in pretty bad shape. Most of the car was actually still intact. A lot of the pieces were thrown inside the car. The major things that we were missing, again, the dash, the steering wheel, the electronic panels, things like that. So, in our restoration of the car, which is not really a restoration, it was really a kind of a preservation. We did the only thing we could do, and we replicated pretty much what you see here. Now, there are a couple panels in here that actually are original to the car. So 2 years after we got the car, there was an eBay auction. And on that eBay auction was this original steering wheel, this original TV frame, and these two electronic panels. And these, we didn't know it at the time. We suspected, but we didn't know until we actually got it, that these pieces were actually from this car. And the person selling it bought it from someone else, and they couldn't give us any more information. But the important thing is that we got the pieces, and we were able to put them into our collection, and get them to the point where we could put them back in the car. But the compass, the speedo board, the voice box, the countdown, the pod units, or the pod electronics, those are all reproduction. So as you can see, here, I'll turn it on, they do static light up, similar to how they were when it was on display, but that's pretty much all the functionality that it had when it was on display. The two original panels, you can see, actually do have some of the lights working, and we had to do only minimal repairs on the wiring to get what you see lit up. And also the lower console, which you can't see, but the lower console was also reproduced because it was missing as well. So the reason I tell you all this and give you all this backstory is to tell you about what happened about a month ago. So for a couple years, AJ and I have been talking to a man named Alfonso Gonzalez, and he caught our attention many years ago on one of the message boards when he said that he had some original pieces from a KITT. So we contacted him, and it turns out that he had pretty much all of the missing pieces for this car. He acquired them through someone else, as I understand it. But the dash shell, the original pods, the one side of the pod electronics, the original voice box, electronics, the countdown. Um, he also had the lower console, the original lower console that went in this car. So we had kept in contact with Alfonso, and he works at Universal Studios Hollywood, and he one of his first jobs at Universal was actually maintenance of or taking care of the Knight Rider cars that were on display. He would go out before the park opened, detail them, things like that, and keep them in good shape. So Alfonso had and still has a very close connection with these cars. So, as I said, we were talking to Alfonso for years on and off, and we sent him pictures of the car and the details on the car that convinced him that it was, yes, the exact same car that was that he took care of at the studio. So we had an opportunity last month to go out and visit him. So I flew to Las Vegas, and AJ and I met AJ there, and he and I drove out to see Alfonso. And Alfonso welcomed us into his house. He had all of the pieces, the missing pieces for this car laid out on his coffee table. It was such a cool sight to walk in and see all those things, because we one of our goals was to, and still is, to make this the most authentic original car out there. And we wanted to inspect these pieces, see some of the construction of the things like that, so we could apply them to this car. Um, and we also decided, this car had kind of had two histories. It had one history when it was a stud car on the show, and another history where it was the theme park car. So we wanted to kind of honor both of those histories. I mean, we weren't going to, take the T-tops out and weld the roof back on, and take out the dash and put the half dash in with the round stunt wheel. Because especially these days, when people expect to see an original kit, they expect to see this dash. And the fact that this car did have a dash that was installed by Universal just after the show, we thought we'd honor kind of both of the histories. So we sat down with Alfonso and started looking over the parts, and talked about our shared history and our shared love of the show and whatnot. And to kind of make a long story short, we ended up working out a deal with Alfonso where we could reunite these parts with the car. So to this day, I still pinch myself of how that night went. We will eternally be grateful to Alfonso for giving us the opportunity to put all of these pieces back into this car, which then in turn will make this, out of the 5 surviving originals, this one will be, without a doubt, the most original screen used Knight Rider car out there, as it came from Universal. So what you see here is still all of the replica pieces, the replica dash and the replica pods and whatnot. The journey to get these pieces back into a good shape and get the wiring fixed and whatnot is going to be a long one. You'll see here shortly when I show you, a lot of the pieces are in pretty poor shape, just from years of neglect and whatnot. And those years of neglect were prior to Alfonso, I should say. He took very, very good care of them. But they need a lot of work. But our goal is to get this car back to 100%. So let's take a look at the different pieces of the car, and we'll go from there. Okay, guys, here is what's currently left of the insert dash. Don't be scared that none of the electronics are there. We do have most of them. So let's take a closer look. So a lot of you have noticed that this dash is currently high gloss black. So the reason for that is obviously when it was the stage dash, I'm sorry, the insert dash. And that's one thing I'll probably do interchangeably is call it insert dash versus stage dash. Um, we originally started calling this the stage dash many, many years ago because, well, it's out on a soundstage. But after talking to some people involved with the show and whatnot, we found out it was referred to as the insert dash because it was for insert shots, close-up shots. So the insert dash, when it was used on the soundstage during the series production, it was not high gloss black. It was more of a matte finish, just like you see whenever you watch the show. As I believe I stated, if not, I'll state it now. When the show ended, this dash went into storage for about a year and a half, and then it came out of storage and they placed it in one of our original kits to be put on display. So at that point, they painted it a high gloss black. They actually went through all the electronics and they kind of cannibalized it. They removed a lot of the functionality of the electronics, and then while they had it all apart and did that, they painted it high gloss black, which it has remained ever since. So just to kind of give you a look at just how bad of a shape this is in. I mean, we've got bubbles in the paint, cracks in the paint. Let's take a closer look here. You can see the paint is peeling. You can see some of the original, I think this is the gel coat of the fiberglass underneath. Lots of different, lots of layers. This thing has been painted many, many, many times. Taking a look in here, that's where the compass would normally be. Speedo board. This is the original voice box. Those are the original lights. As you can see, a lot of the lettering is gone, unfortunately. The gels, the colored gels that were in there are either gone or they have faded to almost clear. You can see a little bit of a gel on the red ones right there. This is aluminum, and believe it or not, it's actually two-piece, or three-piece, excuse me. This piece is one piece, this is a piece, and then this center section is a piece. So I don't know if you can see, I can move that center section and these two stay still. They're actually three pieces. You might be wondering about the pods. We do have the pods. They were, of course, on the stage dash, and when it was on display, they were integrated into the dash, so there was no seam line. They were all, it was all kind of one piece. At some point in this dash's life, after it was removed from our car, someone had hacked this pods off. The good news is, like I said, we have the pods and they will be reattached, and when we're done, you won't even be able to tell. And we'll get to the pods here in a little bit. So moving on, obviously the TAC board would go here. The PAMP board would go here. We have both of these original electronic panels. They're currently in our original car. They will be reinstalled in this dash once we finish all the work on it. See this hole here? So this is interesting. This hole was not here when it was an insert dash on the soundstage. This was added whenever it was put into our car because, again, the car was retrofitted so someone kind of off stage could talk to the visitors who sat in the car to pretend to be KITT. That's where the microphone was. They had a microphone sitting right in there. And then moving over to the opening for the TV, we have the original TV frame. It's currently in the car, so that'll be put back in here, and you'll see there's some screws there, and we'll show you what those hold here in a little bit. Taking another look just over here, just kind of giving you an idea. You can even see just from the glare, the reflection of the lights, I mean, you can see the paint cracks, you can see the waves in it. You know, we'll look back in here. They had just a kind of almost like a window screen in here to catch any debris that would fall down so it didn't get into the car's defroster vents, I'm assuming, or it might have been original from when it was on the insert dash. Lots of paint peeling. I mean, this is probably some of the worst right here. The countdown trough. This is the proper way. Whenever you guys are installing your countdown, just drill a little hole down the center for all the wires. We have the original countdown. We'll show you that here shortly. One thing that maybe you'll notice whenever I show you the upside down view is that this dash is incredibly warped. It was actually left outside for many, many years, as we understand it. And I think the California sun, the heat, the occasional rain and whatnot got to it and warped it. But we are going to do our best to unwarp it. And now let's take a look at the underside. So what you're seeing here is actually the original wood from when it was on the insert dash. It almost looks like this wood was added and then the dash was made on top of it. I don't know, but this is the original wood. I don't know if you can see here, but this back edge is the absolute worst of the damage of this dash. This piece right here, you can see, is the original fiberglass lip. It's actually not fiberglass, it's Bondo. But this is the original lip, back lip of the dash. But look, it's all gone, broken off and destroyed. In fact, if you look the whole way down this lip, the only original piece of this lip that's left, it's still attached, is this about 4-inch section right here. So you can see just they kind of crudely screwed these aluminum strips on to hold this netting down for the defroster vent. These are interesting. There's a few of them throughout the bottom of this. These two, I believe, would have held on the computer printout that you see on the insert dash in certain episodes in season 3 and season 4. I think that's how it would have attached. That's what I'm assuming. There's a few more of them over here. There's also some shots in the series where you can see the insert dash from a little bit further away. And what they did is they actually had pieces of black plastic, hard plastic, coming up here to kind of hide everything underneath. So these were probably also used on this side, on that side, way down there, were used to kind of attach that plastic to hide everything, I'm assuming. Here's the back of the countdown lights. You can see it's all very crude wire wrap. Surprisingly, it all still worked. There was one loose wire right here. We reattached it, and they all lit up, which was pretty awesome. We have these, the name's escaping, these power junction distribution sort of deals. So on this side, we've got the positive, and this side we have negative. So the power would have come in probably here and powered all of these various wires. This whole mess of wires. There's a couple interesting things about these wires. Take a look at this. We have one of the original digits, and this is actually from the tachometer board. So it would have gone somewhere right over here. Now what's funny is we bought the original TAC and the original PMP boards on eBay way back in 2010, which was only a couple years after we even got the car. We bought those boards, and sure enough, the TAC board had all the digits in place except for one. And now, 10 years later, we actually have that one digit we can reattach and fix. A couple other interesting things. Take a look at this. So we've got an old resistor, and we've got one of the colored LEDs for one of the boards. I think this would have been from the speedometer board. Probably the bar above the speedometer itself. And then, of course, we've got another one here. So taking a look at the back of the TV, we've got this aluminum bracket here, which not totally sure what it's for. I'm thinking it had something to do with holding the TV in, or possibly some of the electronics to control some of these other boards. We've got these little turnstile screws that would have held the TV into the back of the dash itself. And then this is the original grounding prongs for the CRT tube itself, and those are still on there. When we got the car didn't, the tube was missing, but we actually had the guts of the TV that were still in the car. So from those guts, we were able to identify the exact model of TV. It was a Zenith color TV. And from there, we were able to purchase a working one and kind of retrofit it and get it to fit back in. So these two pieces are really interesting. So when we got the car, again, we got the car back in 2008, and it was a disaster. It was filled with parts, and some of them we didn't even know what they were for. Some of those parts are these two things here, right here. When we first got the car, we didn't necessarily know what these two parts were. We ended up figuring out what this one was for. But this, we found this piece of Bondo, and we're like, well, what does this go to? We have no idea. And then this is a not aluminum, a steel metal bracket. And we figured, well, is something in the car, but we were never able to tie it into anything. So take a look at this. So this random piece that we found in the car 10 years ago that we've had and we saved for 10 years sitting in a bag. Watch this. Right there. Another piece of the lip that we've had all this time. And the fact that it actually matches up exactly to the small piece of lip that's already here is just amazing. So now we have a little bit more of a lip and a little bit less that we have to recreate. So we'll get this reattached and put that back on there. And then this other piece here is really, really cool. Check this out. See that hole? Look at that. Locks right in. That was one of the original brackets. We don't know if that bracket was from when it was on an insert dash, but it was definitely used in the car. And this is part of how it was connected to the car itself. And it just fits right in there, separated for 10, 15 years, and now it's back together. And you can see this piece also had the other female end that would have held in that black plastic. So pretty cool, huh? So these two pieces, there's an interesting story about these two pieces. We found these two pieces back in 2008 when we got the car. It was filled with parts whenever we got it. It was in really bad shape. There was just parts everywhere. Some of the stuff we found were these two pieces. We made a rule back whenever we were putting this car back together that nothing would be thrown out. So we bagged these, we tagged them as to where we found them in the car and kind of set them aside. In the intervening 10 years, we figured out where this bracket went, but we never really knew where this, this thing went, this piece of Bondo. So check this out. We're going to take this and we're going to place it right there. A perfect fit. Look at that. The fact that this piece, this loose piece that we've had for 12 years, would match up with the only small piece of lip that's still left on this dash is absolutely amazing. So that's a little bit less of the lip we're going to have to recreate, and we'll get this reattached. But what I really wanted to show you was this thing. This is really cool also. I guess they're both pretty cool, but look at this. We're going to take this, we're going to put it in here, locked. Fits like a glove. This is the original bracket that we don't know if it was there when it was the stage dash, but when it was in the car, this bracket connected to the car kind of held that side in place to keep it from, just to keep it sturdy. So, and you can see it also in that piece also had another one of these nuts in it, I guess you could say, to hold in that black plastic. And then, I mean, just look at how perfectly that just locks in there. So to be able to reunite these pieces was pretty cool. All right, so that's the back of the insert dash. All right, now let's take a look at the original pod unit. As I said, whenever I was reviewing the dash, you can see that the pod was sawed off by someone at some point and separated. So taking a look at it here, obviously our goal is we're going to get this reattached and then make it smooth so you never know it was ever removed. But you can see the wear here from the steering wheel and the turning of the steering wheel over the years. So if we look over here, we can see there's the other end of the Molex connector for the back of the pods. And one thing I failed to mention when I was going over the pods, we only have the left bank. The right bank of them are still missing. So at least we have one to kind of reference when we're replicating. And that's what we'll do. We'll replicate the other side. Then hopefully the originals will pop up one day. But you can see some interesting things. There's an aluminum plate in the back that screws on and off, and someone wrote dash part on there. And, they've got some other things. These arms are actually solid. If you could pick this pod up, it actually weighs quite a bit, a lot more than, any of the replica pods you buy today. And that's mainly due to the fact that they needed to reinforce this for when it was on display at the studio to make sure that all the people getting in and out didn't crack the arms off of it. But so these two spacers, the pod electronics go on there, and then there's two holes in the pod electronics, and you put screws in there, and that's how they're held in. So flipping it over, take a look at the back here. You can see the aluminum doors held in by those two screws. And then if we look in here, you can see how this is solid and super thick. And then we have some conduit, a metal conduit here and a metal conduit there that provides the power to the two pods. So there you go. There's the original insert dash pods. So here's our pod electronics that also go to the dash. This is one of the original insert dash pods. So, every time you see turbo boost being pressed, you're seeing that exact button being pressed. Same with passive laser restraint and some other ones. So I'm going to take this cover off. This was added for when it was in the car to protect the buttons, but this will give you a good look at the actual pods. As you can see, a lot of the colored gels have faded over the years just due to age and exposure and whatnot. The greens are still pretty green. This is an aluminum cutout right here. It's about 1/8 of an inch thick. And then they wrapped it in this textured vinyl, the same one you see when you watch the show and look up close. So these buttons are pressable. I'm going to save the actual lighting up of this for a future video, but power has been applied to this. They do light up. Some of the buttons do work, some don't, because I think the internals are broken on some of these buttons. You can tell when you press them that some don't work and some do. But the way that these were wired for the insert dash is when power is applied, the left bank all comes on, and then these are actually latching buttons, not momentary. So when you press them, the corresponding LED on the right turns on. When you press it again, they turn off. Except for the arrows. When you press that arrow button, both arrows turn on and both arrows turn off. So let's take a look at the back. See what we got. So as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. We have our Molex 2-pin connector here. And then beyond that, just the buttons hardwired with resistors to the LEDs. Pretty straightforward. So yeah, this, as you can see, this plexi is pretty dirty and scratched and whatnot, but when it was put on display, when the insert dash was put on display, they added these covers to it just so guests sitting in the car couldn't scratch the words off or do other things like that. Here is KITT's voice box, the actual voice box that you see anytime KITT is talking in the 4th season. During the whenever you see a close-up of the voice and see the insert dash, and you see him talking, you were looking at this exact piece. This one, as you can see, it's got quite a bit of wear. There was a lot of there's still a lot of debris, some resin and some silicone that was covering this. If you look in this bottom corner, you see just the hint of the red plexi that used to be there. These labels are in pretty bad shape. They are original though. From our teaser video, I had a couple people mention to me, you know, why does that just say normal and not normal cruise? So if you watch the show in the 3rd season, this does say normal cruise, normal on the top line, cruise on the bottom, and then auto cruise and pursuit, just as you see them. In the 4th season, they changed that slightly to just say normal. So, you know, we would expect on this one to just say normal because it's already been through filming of the 4th season and whatnot. Yeah, these are in pretty rough shape. We have not tested the voice box piece of this yet, the actual 10 segment LEDs, but we will. But I'm sure what you guys want to see is the back. So before we show you the back, let me just show you how these are offset. So if you look at it from the side, you can see there's actually 2 circuit boards here, and the second one is simply to give these LEDs a little bump out so that whenever the plexi goes over this part, it's all flush in the front. And then let's check out the back. So here is what made up KITT's voice, a bunch of wire wrap. Very exactly what we'd expect to see on an 80s electronic piece. And then we also have this kind of secondary board, standoff board, and there's some spacers here that are screwed on. But here we see the original resistors, and these are all specifically for the normal auto pursuit lights at the bottom. Right here, these pins, this is actually how they controlled the normal auto and pursuit. So this top one is the ground, and then that second one is for the normal light, then auto cruise, then pursuit. The bottom, I'm sorry, I have that off by one. This second one is not in use. The third one is normal, then auto, then pursuit, as you can see. We've also got a couple sockets here. This one's a 16, I think they're both 16 pin. And we can see here that they labeled 1 to 8, so we can see which direction the IC goes. Unfortunately, the ICs are missing, but those would have been a crucial piece of being able to control the voice box. So now it's a matter of trying to reverse engineer what they did, the circuit that they used to make KITT's voice light up. So if you guys have any ideas as to what chips would go in here, think we're in 1984 and they're designing this, what chips would go in there to control this? If you know, leave a note in the comments below or send us a message. So what we're going to do here, this is going to be very time consuming, but we're going to carefully create a circuit, a diagram, wiring diagram with all of these connections, and we'll lay it out on paper, and that might help us also figure out kind of what chips go in here, because our ultimate goal is to make this work again. Whenever you think about that insert dash and KITT's voice working, chances are they had a cassette tape or some kind of a sound reel that was connected to this. So they would play William Daniels' voice or whoever's voice was subbing for William Daniels, and then the voice would react to that sound. So there's got to be some kind of an audio input, but we want to make it exactly the way it was back on the show, because I don't know how many of you guys have noticed, but pretty much all of the voice boxes that are out there today, they just don't look 100% correct. If you look at especially the 4th season of the show, when KITT's voice is talking, towards the outer edges of the lights that are on, they're never at full brightness. You know, there's a fade to them. And all of the vendors out there, at least all the ones that I have seen, it's either all on or nothing. And it makes KITT's voice look cleaner actually than it really should be. So when Keith talks, there should be fading at the end. So what we want to do is try and replicate that simply by getting the original circuitry and electronics back to working order. So there is KITT's original voice box. So here we have the original countdown for the 3rd, 4th season insert dash. To my knowledge, this is the only original countdown with electronics that has survived. I know that there's Scott out there, Scott Edmondson owns an original bezel as well. I don't know if he has the electronics, so I could be wrong about that, but these are in fact the original electronics. This is from the insert dash. These are the exact ones you see when Michael calls for KITT to power up, and you see power on, fuel, min, RPM, igniters. Now, again, just like all the other pieces, this one's got quite a bit of wear. It's got these holes drilled into it. This is how it was secured to the dash. And if you think about it, if you think about the insert dash, you actually never really see it from this angle. You only ever really see it from this angle. So the question is, are these screw holes original from the insert dash, or were they added when the car went on display to keep it in place so no one would steal it? I don't know yet. I still have more research to do. But this is just aluminum that's been bent and cut. And if we look at the underside, we've got all the original LEDs. They all still work. They've fallen out of their bezels. They're all just kind of in here very loosely. But we'll of course fix that. But let's take a look here. So there's your min RPM. And let's see if we can get igniter to show. Igniter, there's igniters. It's that label's a little worse for wear. Fuel on looks really, really good. Power looks really, really good as well, if I can get it to show here. No, it doesn't want to. There we go. Power. So that is the original countdown. Now, currently, as you can see, these have all been wired together. So when power is applied, all 4 light on. We know obviously when it was in the insert dash, they would light on in sequence one at a time. I think that the change in the circuitry was because it was then going to be put on display. So the insert dash was no longer going to need the functionality of these lighting up in sequential order. They just wanted them all on just for the effect. So I'm almost positive what they did was they cut out the wiring, removed the logic that would allow it to count down, and just simply hardwired them all together so when power was applied, they'd all light up. But that's where it stands now. There's original countdown. And even though this isn't necessarily part of the insert dash, this is something that you guys are going to want to see. This is the original insert lower console. So anytime you'd see the close-up of the lower console in the 3rd and 4th season, this is the piece you were looking at. Now, I'm sure your first question is, where are the electronics? So when Universal was taking these pieces out of storage to place in this car, they ended up not using the insert lower console electronics as you see it on the screen. Those were used for another purpose, for another project. So Universal built some very crude, inaccurate pieces to go in here. But one neat thing that you'll see here is
are these wings. So if we hold it like this, you see how this has wings. Now, these are actually pieces of aluminum that have been fiberglassed in, and I'll show you here in a minute. The reason for these pieces was to attach the console to the insert Trans Am console, the one that they use on the for the close-up. So if you ever notice, whenever you see a close-up of this, you still see the gear shifter and whatnot. So whatever apparatus that was, whether it was an actual Trans Am console or whether it was a block of wood that they made to look like the console, they put this piece on, and then they screwed it in, 3 on this side, 3 on the other side to secure it. What's really cool is, when the show ended and whenever they took this piece and put it in our original car, they drilled 3 holes into our stock lower console. So for years, we've had our car, with the lower console and a replica Knight Rider lower console in there. But the stock console has had these 3 holes in it on either side for all these years. And finally, we're going to be able to put this piece in, and using what we think are actually the original screws that we found inside the car, we'll be able to actually screw this back into the console for the first time in 15 years. So that's really kind of cool. So about this arm here, this is very interesting. So as you can see, it looks kind of stubby in a way. What happened was a previous owner ended up cutting off a piece of this arm. It originally extended about out to here. They cut off a piece of that arm because they were going to use this for another project. And then they did a very nice job grafting, putting a new plate in and smoothing it all out. But what we are looking to restore this back to exactly how it was. But obviously with that piece missing, it kind of makes you wonder, well, what did that look like? Because you can see it starts to kind of jut out on one side. Luckily, a few years ago, we ended up obtaining this. So what you're looking at here is another screen used Season 3-4 lower console, but this one has its full arm intact. So you can see on this one, it starts to jut out here. And here's what it actually looked like. It juts way out and over. So because we managed to obtain this screen use piece, we're going to be able to graft on, we'll take a mold, actually we already have a mold of this one. And we're going to graft on this missing piece onto the original one and restore it back to the way it was. These are the only 2 known surviving Season 3-4 screen used consoles in the world, as far as we know. They probably never made very many of them. This is actually the one that came from the Hero car. And I know some of you are going to say, well, if it came from the Hero car, why aren't there the window switches here? The truth is, after the show, this was used again for another purpose, for a display piece. Where a lot of people would be getting in. So they removed the window switches and they actually glassed them over. So I know I'm kind of getting off topic here, but if we look under here, might be hard for you to see, but they actually filled in those window switches and put fresh glass under there to hide them. So this is the console that was in the 3rd 4 season Hero car. This is the one that was on the insert dash on the soundstage. These very well may be the only 2 they ever made for the show, because most of the other cars didn't even have a lower console in them. So thankfully we have this. We're going to be able to restore this back to the way it was. For the missing pieces, we own an original Alpine radio. We own an original tape deck, the same ones that they use. So we're going to use those pieces and we're going to rebuild the missing electronics for our screen use piece for the insert dash before it goes into our car again. But taking a look under here, you can see here they did a nice job glassing those aluminum pieces in. This one, of course, never had the window switches in, and if you see the close-ups of the lower console on the soundstage, you'll see it never had window switches either. So that all kind of lines up. So there's the season 3-4 insert lower console.
So thanks for watching this video. If you like this type of content and you want us to do more about Knight Rider, leave a message in the comments below. Let us know, what video should we do next? What do you want to know about the original cars? Give us a like, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, please. All those things really help us and motivate us to continue to bring you new and cool and exclusive content. Thanks.